Okay, good evening, councillors, to this extremely warm evening. It's summer, so, but it doesn't have to be quite this warm. So welcome everybody. I've got my official readout here. So good evening and welcome to the July meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Councillors and officers are reminded to put their mobile phone or electronic device on silent if they have one near them, and those present in the room should face forward, speak directly into the microphones, and do not place papers or electronic devices between themselves and the microphones. Please, with remote participants, mute microphones when not speaking, as this will reduce feedback and background noise and save bandwidth to prevent loss of connection. Members of the council joining us remotely should leave cameras on. Officers leave cameras on only for agenda items to which you are speaking. After each item has been presented, I will invite members to speak, members present in the room to speak first and ask questions first. Those members joining us remotely will then be invited to speak, and should they they should indicate their wish to do so by using the raise your hand facility. Only those members of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee present in the room will be making the decisions, and I will confirm the result verbally for the benefit of those watching the webcast. I was thinking there was no one online, but Councillor Jeanette Stevens has just turned up, so that we know it works. So, straight on to the agenda. I will tweak the agenda, but let's do the first ones first. So, minutes. Do I have your authorisation as chairman to sign the minutes of the meeting held of this committee on the 6th of June 2022 as a correct record of the proceedings? Yes, very lovely, thank you. Apologies and substitutions. We believe we have apologies from Councillor Earl Williams, so that therefore the substitute will be Councillor Mrs Barnes. Additional agenda items, there are none. Disclosure of interest, possibly not, I wouldn't think. So hopefully, well, if anything comes up, then obviously declare it at the time. What I will do, as the Town Hall Renaissance project is the largest item here and may take some time, what I'd like to do is deviate, if you like, from the agenda and take items 6, 7 and 8 first, and then we go back to the Town Hall Renaissance project. So we get 6, 7 and 8 first, and if Joe wants, he can go home. Unless you're waiting for a staff member. You mentioned someone might join you, Joe? No, that's all right. What I didn't want to do is have someone sat there for possibly 3 hours and then we never get to it and then they go home. So if everybody's in agreement with that, then I think that's probably the best way around it. Then we've got plenty of time for the town hall. So, item 6, anti-poverty strategy, pages 89 to 112. You'll see here most of this work has been done by the Anti-Poverty Steering Group, ably chaired by Councillor Coleman. We've got officer recommendations are the anti-poverty strategy be recommended to Cabinet and full Council for adoption, which I think takes place next Monday, or the Cabinet is next Monday. And Cabinet and full Council note the Anti-Poverty Steering Group will form to oversee the delivery of the strategy action plan, as well as inform the development of the broader health and wellbeing strategy for Robber. So, Joe, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Just bear with me 1 second. So, yeah, as members will be aware that as explained by the Chairman, the report has been through the Task and Finish group, and we had a project or steering group in its initial form at the Pelham event at the Pelham around Christmas time last year, and were able to sort of validate the objectives that the Task and Finish group had put together and get input from a range of services locally and county-wide. So Public Health England, Public Health, County Council, CCG, our Citizens Advice colleagues, and a range of voluntary sector partners who fed into and alongside Councillor Coleman and myself, RVA were able to sort of lead that event and rather voluntary action that is, and support us to validate those objectives and to provide and deliver an action plan against them. So the strategy consultation was for 6 weeks, and you can see details of that are Appendix B. The strategy itself, or draft strategy as it still is at Appendix A. In total, we received 66 responses from members of the public, as well as 25 organisations, and again, the detail of which can be found at Appendix B. To remind you all, the objectives identified by this committee and approved at Cabinet are for greater coordination, greater access and greater promotion of services to groups experiencing poverty and experiencing inequality more broadly. The Overview and Scrutiny Committee has also noted these objectives in the past and the fact that the local strategic partnership should oversee the strategic governance and ensure that the action plan and strategy itself is moved forward as it should do, and that there's somewhere for the steering group proposed in the recommendations to report, and for those outcomes to be monitored and performance monitored as well. So I think it's important to note that the emerging cost of living crisis that so-called that's ensuing presently as the strategy was developed before the full extent of that has come to the fore. So we have therefore recognised that in the covering report that there probably is more work for this steering group to do in terms of reacting to that and responding to those changing circumstances and changes in the cost of living, and for various reasons, and that steering group is well placed to evolve the strategy and to do to keep it relevant, make sure that it's reacting, responding to the need identified. To that end, two of the key organisational responses from both the Clinical Commissioning Group and Public Health East Sussex were very keen to highlight the symmetry and the symbiosis really with the emerging integrated care group or integrated care system, which is the new health commissioning Sussex-wide body that was formed in July earlier this month, and identifying in particular within that one of the four key areas that they're addressing, and one of them in particular relates to some of the themes identified in our strategy development, and namely addressing inequalities and outcomes and experience and access. So that's really about this key theme again that is within our strategy and was in our strategy development. Is about inequality in its various forms, and inequality of access to services, inequality of access to advice and systems and local services perhaps, and looking at how well in future these strategic objectives can be aligned to that health agenda, only that it provides us at a local level with greater, we hope, greater sort of relevance to future commissioning ideas in a health context, and trying to harness the benefits of that locally and maximise the benefits of those emerging resources in the integrated care system as well as we can. Also thought important to highlight, just to back that up, the Health Foundation has also explored many of the main drivers of health inequality in some depth, and some of those are key to note, I think, for this group, and that's about money and resources, about work and unemployment, housing, transport, neighbourhood and surroundings, communities, family networks. Again, these themes were the ones coming up in the Task and Finish group time and again in terms of the broad spectrum of need out there. So in conclusion, the strategy remains, I think, a starting point. Its aims and ambitions are relatively modest, but I think achievable within the context of a burgeoning network locally, which does exist, but is perhaps burgeoning in terms of coalescing around these objectives for the first time in such a way. And I think the steering group proposed is well placed to oversee the action plan objectives and deliver those, but also to bring back to this group, to this committee, Overview and Scrutiny Committee, I should say, in the future. And we hope, we imagine in shortly, in not too long a time, really, because of the energy and enthusiasm within public health in particular, to have more of a local relevance and have more of a local flavour to what they're doing, and hopefully piggyback some of the work that's been already identified in the Task and Finish Group programme around health and wellbeing. Whether there's a need for some of these objectives in the future to be amalgamated into a wider health and wellbeing strategy, and whether that's a sensible consideration of the Council. So, yeah, recommended to you as is before you, and happy to take questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Joe. Councillor Coleman, you as chairman of the group, obviously you've got something to say on this, I hope.
Yeah, I mean, I think committee have heard me speak on this many times now, so I won't go through the same sort of thing that I always do. And I think actually I say most of it in the foreword of the strategy in terms of sort of my thoughts on this. But I think, you know, it almost couldn't have come at a better time in terms of the need for this strategy, and in a worse time in terms of sort of the outcomes for people who are struggling, many of them working people who maybe have never struggled before in this way, who, because of austerity, followed by just a greater or lesser extent Brexit, followed by the pandemic, and then latterly this cost of living crisis, are you know, in dire need of help, and also in need of the services that are there already to help them functioning properly and functioning as effectively as they can. And I think that's really what this strategy aims to get started, is that making sure that all of these organisations, including us as a council, are functioning as effectively as we can be when we are delivering these services, that we are joined up, that we aren't duplicating things whilst missing gaps in other areas, and that, you know, we can give people this kind of one-stop shop, if you like, so that when someone is in need, they don't go on the radar and then fall off it again. Once they're on the radar, they stay on the radar until they get the help that they need. So yeah, I think, you know, thank you again to the members of the Task and Finish group, to Joe, to Claire from RVA, to all of the people who responded to the consultation. There was quite a wide range of responses from organisations, actually, from the usual sort of CCG, HARC, the CAB, the food banks, through to, I think there was a Labour Party response, a Liberal Democrat response, I think the Green Party responded. So there was a real sort of wide range of views, from politics through to sort of local government, through to health, through to, you know, all of these areas, people on the front line as well. And I think all of them said this was kind of what was needed right now in this area, was this kind of joined up thinking and this collaborative approach to dealing with poverty. But as Joe says, it is just a start. This is no way going to sort of stop poverty. It's no way going to sort of change the landscape of how we deal with poverty, but it is very much making sure the groundwork is there for this, hopefully this future health and wellbeing strategy, this future sort of look at the health and well-being of our citizens, of our residents in those regards, because I think poverty and health are inextricably linked. You know, if you're living in a private rental property that's, you know, cheaper than most other private rental properties, it's probably more likely to have damp and mould in it. The landlord maybe not be so keen to look after it as well, and so your health is affected by that. If you haven't been able to have the same access to education, to resources as people who are better off than you, then your health and well-being is affected by that. Your chance of life is affected by that. If you've not been able to get the education, get the jobs, get the skills that other people have, again, your health and well-being can be affected by that. So I think the two areas are linked. And whilst it's important not to forget some of the areas of poverty that maybe aren't so linked to health, I think health and well-being is actually a really good umbrella to start looking at these issues in the round, and also encompassing other things that we've looked at at Scrutiny and that Cabinet have looked at, in terms of health and well-being, leisure, recreation, cycling, healthy living, getting active. All of these things, I think, can start to work together to make our citizens happy and healthy. And I think that's all I have to say. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you. Councillor Barnes, you indicated you wish to speak.
Chairman, I represent the Council on the Health and Wellbeing Board. Although I don't have a vote, I'm simply an observer. I also obviously have a background in the health service as a non-executive for 18 years in various health bodies. And what I really wanted to highlight a couple of things. The first, I wanted just to say a little more about the integrated partnership. I don't think Joe intended to mislead, but inadvertently he probably gave the impression that this has just started. In fact, we were well ahead of the game in East Sussex. We've been working together as a partnership now for about 2 years, and therefore, in a sense, the legislation was pioneered by us and a number of other authorities, and therefore the integrated partnership is going to hit the ground running. And that's quite important because in many ways we are luckier in this area than in many areas at the moment about the health crisis. A lot of other health authorities, particularly the acute care sector and the ANCE sector, are in a much worse position than we are. What, of course, we do have here is very low wage levels, areas of deprivation, and we have some pluses. It's surprising how important the countryside is to mental well-being and walking in the countryside. So having the beautiful countryside is actually an asset, offsetting some of the disadvantages. But what became acutely clear to me as I talked about this on the anti-poverty group was the longer-term agenda, not just the immediate crisis. Because if you're going to do something about longer-term deprivation and its health outcomes, you really need to start with what used to be called playgroups, now early years education, but absolutely crucial, and educating parents, that's a crucial area. Housing is very key, as well as education. Sam has highlighted the importance of jobs, and there are a number of other areas where, frankly, this council already plays an active part. But I think we had a higher profile for it about 10 years ago when there was a primary care trust. It was a member of the local strategic partnership, rather very active. The work still goes on, but it hasn't really been surfaced to members. And in some ways, I think having the new steering group and developing a health and wellbeing strategy for this area is a crucial task, but it will actually raise the profile. Because at the end of the day, the crucial things are prevention and actually well-being. We don't want people to get into health problems. And above all, we don't want them to drift into acute care unnecessarily. And we have a very key part to play in that prevention and well-being area. And we really do need to address it and complement what is going on at county level with the integrated care partnership.
Thank you. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. I would like to congratulate Councillor Coleman and these committee members, because although it's been going quite well now, it has meant that there's been a real focus on anti-poverty and the issues around it. One of the issues for me, because I don't drive, is transport needs. I mean, it's silly, you don't get a bus in the evening, so if a young person wants to earn some money and go work in Bexhill in the town, they've got to pay for taxis, and that takes money out of your wages. If they want to go to Bexhill College for further education, they've got to get there and get back. Silly practical things like that. But I want to focus on the practical help that Rother is giving to people on low incomes. And I think we should be very proud of ourselves. We've got the exceptional hardship scheme, which is effective for Rother. We've got the council tax reduction scheme. And also, I've had quite a lot of discussions with officers over the last few weeks. The tranche of money we got from the government for the household support grant is up and running. It's very, very efficiently running now. The officers are doing a brilliant job. At least 12 families in my ward I've brought to their attention. And the larger families are getting around about £150 in support for the supermarkets. And there's a £50 voucher for fuel allowance. And that is a massive bit of help to people at the moment. And that is because it's right for the government to say, yeah, where's the money, but we've still got to get the infrastructure and the work for the officers to find the time to set this up. But it's now brilliantly running. You can get it onto an app, take it to the supermarket. And it's very much appreciated by my residents. I'm sure it's all the other residents in Rother. So this council is being effective. It's doing what it can. And the rest of it is partnership working. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs Barnes.
Thank you, Chairman. It was very interesting hearing Joe and Sam, then listening to what my husband had to say, because to a certain extent that encompasses the questions I was going to ask, which is that we have the strategy, we know who the groups are, but what as a council happens in between? How does it all come to us? How do we deal with it? Do we have a budget for help? I mean, what happens? Do we have a department that is going to be taken on to cope with what is going to be an increasing number of people who are going to find it very, very difficult to make ends meet? I would just like to say I'd like to see the end of inequality. I think it's the most loathsome thing. And I think we need really to use that as our opportunity to make certain that we don't lose sight and it doesn't disappear into a filing cabinet of everything that has been discovered or that has been reported as part of that very valuable group. So I would really like to know what happens next.
I think Joe will probably just about tell you.
I'll attempt to. It's a very good question. It's a very big question. The literal answer to that is that we are going to form the steering group. We have had confirmation from one of the strategy leaders in public health, East Sussex, to chair that group, and she's a very knowledgeable and better resourced professional and better knowledge and experience of the health sector and the sector more widely than anyone in Rother District Council does, to be clear. So I think it's about understanding our respective roles and responsibilities in this. And there is no one service that is responsible for all of the drivers of poverty and for managing all the symptoms of it. But I do think with health and the emerging health agenda, it's not, as Councillor Barnes was apt to say, no longer emerging, the health agenda that's before us, there really isn't. There is a common theme for us to get round together, which is these wider determinants of health and health inequality, and the drivers of that, as put in that Health Foundation report, which I'd recommend people look at, which tries to capture that very thing that you mentioned, tries to tie these threads together. So literally what happens next is that group will begin to meet and try to align what we're doing against that health agenda, to try and do exactly what you mentioned, which is to bring in resources and align resources in the health and social care sectors and our own limited resources to try and target those at the groups that are the most, where resources are the most unequal, whether that's in rural or urban areas or those groups who are experiencing the greatest challenge, and make the best use of what resources we do have. But there are people amongst our staff group that are going to experience challenges. this winter, and it's starting to affect a wider cohort and a wider group of people. No easy answer to that question, I'm afraid, Councillor, but I do hope that with the where we've got to, and the fact that we have this new this emerging chair and this closer alignment to the health agenda, I do hope that we have a greater chance of being more coherent in our responses to what challenges are coming down the line. But that we can't pretend that we're going to meet all the need that is emerging, because we will struggle to. But I hope with this approach we are well placed to do so.
Thank you. That's a really encouraging reply. We've always been a compassionate council. We have never willingly allowed anybody to suffer. And I can remember years ago Malcolm saying, well, if we all know as councillors anyone who is in real poverty, come and see him. And I think he's got a drawer where he's got a little piggy bank. But we have a duty, I think, to continue this, make certain that it doesn't actually ever be allowed to be forgotten. It's very good work that was done, and I think we need to continue it.
Thank you. We've got a couple more. Councillor Cortell.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'd like to commend Councillor Coleman and his team on the Task and Finish group, and Joe Powell and his team for the excellent work they've done on this project. I've got a couple of questions, one observation and one question. I was amazed to discover that 49% of lone parent families are in poverty. That is quite a staggering statistic. My question relates to the Bexhill Food Bank. On page 103 of this report, Wad of Reports, I'm reading that 12,651 people were fed in 2021 through the Bexhill Food Bank. Is this 12,000 visits, or were 12,000 individuals in Bexhill fed through the food bank?
I wouldn't like to be quoted because it's not those are stats fed to us from no pun intended, from the food bank themselves, but I would expect it to be visits.
Thank you. That clarifies things, because 12,000 people is 1/4 of the population of Bexhill. I was a little bit surprised reading that, but thanks.
I would like to think it's a few people making many visits as opposed to 25% of the population going once, but there we are. Who have we got next? Councillor Mooney.
Thank you. I think my colleague John Barnes hit the nail on the head. It's all very fine having strategies and nice words, but the fact of the matter is, to quote Nelson Mandela, overcoming poverty is not a gesture of charity. It is the protection of the fundamental human right, the right to dignity and a decent life. What are we on earth doing about that? And all these strategies in the world, this is where Councillor John Barnes and his good wife, Councillor Mary Barnes, you start with playgroups. Some have actually been closed down because it's too expensive for parents to send their children to playgroups. For instance, Beckley and Northam was linked together because they couldn't run alone. Then we have a situation where you have childminding. Well, single parents have to go to work. So what happens to the children? See, these are the things we should be actually looking at and working with people. It's extraordinary. It's frightening, actually, that the statistics are frightening, but we have to have follow-ups on this, because we're hearing it every day on television. It's coming over, and we have a responsibility as a council. And I hope what you say, Joe, that we have somebody at county who's going to drive it, because we need a driver. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, I would assume that's the idea of having a working group with the existing members carrying on the work, and Councillor Coleman, as the council's spokesman on this, keep an eye on it, basically.
Chairman, I better declare an interest as an East Sussex council.
Yeah. Did you want to come back quickly, Sam?
Yeah, just on a few of the points, really. I think one of the roles of actually not just this council, but this overview and scrutiny committee will be in the future to call that working group back here to present to us so that we can scrutinise and make sure that they are being as effective as we hope they will be, and that they are keeping sight of these aims, because I think it is really important. I think now, across the political divide, everyone is looking at cost of living as an issue. Certainly it was mentioned in the most sort of recent TV debates and things, and it's always been an issue as far as I can see within the Labour Party and other parties. So I think it is something that everyone now is looking at. Everyone will have different solutions, and certainly I think most of us agree that some sort of national solution is needed ultimately. But what we can do locally, we must do, because for everything that we don't do, for everything that we think, well, it's not going to make a big difference, so why bother? That could be potentially another 1, 2, 3, 10, 50 families, individuals who are at a food bank or experiencing homelessness, or are turning up at sort of Joe's office saying, I've lost my house, I can't pay my rent, what do I do? So I think every little thing we can do does make that difference to those individuals, and it is a worrying situation right now, and we just have to hope it gets better and do everything we can in our powers.
Thank you. Councillor Cook.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to very quickly confirm what Councillor Cortell was concerned about. At Battle, we fed 800 people in this last 6 months, and it is visits, not 800 people in total. It's 800 meals, as it were, we've given out. Councillor Mary Barnes alluded to what we hope to achieve by forming this strategy, and how we can measure the success or progress of this strategy. And I would suggest that we can measure how many people we can lift out of poverty, whether by providing them with a much better house, providing them with a job. But I absolutely agree with Councillor Clark. Until we get better public transport, which can enable teenagers to get their jobs so that they can become independent and start to have belief in themselves, it's just really hard. I recently went on a visit to Baton Bull railway station, and they have the new Uber bus there. I can't think what it's called. It's called a Go Something bus, but it's like an Uber bus, and it has proved invaluable. And I think that's something we could perhaps look at. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think we give Councillor Stevens put her yellow hand up, but then she's disappeared. So maybe she has an internet issue. So if she's not there, I think we probably push that around the table a bit. Councillor Coleman, would you wish to move the recommendation as chairman?
Absolutely, Chair. I move that we pass this on to Cabinet.
And Councillor Cook seconded? Yeah, okay.
Second.
All those in favour? That's carried. Thank you very much. Well, Joe can go home. Go and jump in the kids' paddling pool. Thanks, Joe. Item 7, Revenue Budget Capital Programme Monitoring Draft Outturn, pages 113 to 120. What have we got here? Report be noted. Tony, anything to say?
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everyone. As you say, the report is for noting. I'll just, on the assumption that everyone's read the report, I'll try and pick out some of the highlights from the report. So, The revenue outturn was £1.3 million lower than the approved budget. So in other words, we planned to spend £2.7 million from reserves, but only took £1.4 million, and that was a £1.1 million improvement on the position that we were forecasting in Q3. The draft capital outturn is outturned at £12.3 million, which is well below the expected budget, and is also about £3 million lower than what we predicted in Q3. Sorry, I should have said at the beginning of the report, Chair, that both sets of numbers are subject to audit, so that's why they're draft, but we're not anticipating any or many, if any, changes to those numbers. And just a little bit about council tax and business rates, collection rates in paragraph 17 to 18. They've both improved on last year, and I'd like to say a little bit more about that when I get to the end of the report. So, revenue forecasts that Appendix A refers, and the main changes from Q3 are explained in paragraphs 4 to 12. I won't go through them one by one, but some of the bigger numbers we are including in paragraph 8. We've achieved more income than we were originally anticipating from car parking and garden waste income, about £153,000 more there. We also were in receipt of a National Leisure Relief Fund grant from the Department for for Culture and Media Services, and that meant we had to passport that money to Freedom Leisure. We passported that money to Freedom Leisure, but that meant that the original costs that Freedom Leisure were expecting to bill the council for, about $130,000, didn't materialise, so that grant helped us out as well. Paragraph 12, we did receive more government grant during the year, mainly since Q3 we received another £97,000 in relation to homelessness prevention, but we also got some smaller amounts in relation to new burdens. And by new burdens, we get money from the DLUHC every now and then for managing things like the council tax rebate scheme, for example. So they're not huge amounts of money, but they are nonetheless gratefully accepted. Capital programme in Appendix B, the main variances again are summarised in paragraph 14. And the pace of the programme, this is a well-known fact now, I hope, the pace of the programme has been slowed by the pandemic, and that's caused most of the significant variances. However, there are some timing differences rather than project underspends, or most of it is timing differences, should I say, rather than project underspends. And I'll say a little bit more about that in the next report that I present on the Q1 forecast. So the impact on reserves, that's analysed in Appendix C, and so the drawdown is about 1.2 million. Collection fund performance, just want to say a little bit about that before I finish off, Chair. It's a good news story because our collection rates have held up very well from 2021. But there is a caveat to that, and again, I'll come on to that in the Q1 monitoring report. But as far as 21-22 is concerned, when you consider about the various lockdowns we had and the impact of the pandemic, collection rates held up very well. So that's it for the 21-22, and happy to try and take any questions.
Okay, thank you, Tony. Well, I remember either last meeting or meeting before we had a concern over homelessness. Is this 97,000 grant sort of towards, well, I won't say, well, towards winter, the sort of potential issue? Is that what that's for, or is that coming in to cover last year or something?
Sorry, Chair. Joe would have been better placed to answer, but I'll try my best. If from memory, I think we put about another £200,000 on top of the 21-22 budget for homelessness. This £97,000 was additional, and we weren't notified of it until fairly late in the financial year. It's not stopped us being able to spend it, of course. So I think it's a case of, you know, every bit helps, and that's the case of this grant. Good. That's right. Any questions? There's a couple of questions. I'll go Councillor Cortell first.
Thank you, Chair. I think there's a good news story here. We've, thanks to Tony and the senior management team, who have managed to reduce a the use of reserves to balance the budget from 2.7 million to just 1.4 million. And that indicates that Tony is very cautious in his budgeting, and we are now seeing the fruits of this, which is encouraging for future projections.
Thank you. Councillor Maynard.
Thank you very much, Chairman. In fact, quite clearly, whilst I obviously echo the comments about the way that the work has been done throughout the year, thanks are certainly due to government for the extra money that has been made available, and all members can see that within the tables, and I think that government should be congratulated for responding in that way, because those sums are not inconsiderable. Just want some clarification on the current situation with regard to Ravenside Roundabout, because there's been a bit of toing and froing on social media, and I think this is a good opportunity for any officer to jump in and just give us a quick update. Thank you.
I think Ben can do that one.
Thank you, Chairman. There is a report going to Cabinet on Monday. It's now in the public domain. The project continues to progress, and Donna Hall, who's the officer working on that, is continuing to work to try and overcome some of the issues there. But we're through the phase 1 works, which is primarily to be carried out by National Highways. We're going to be starting have to look for some additional funding elsewhere to introduce the artwork that was originally planned as the phase 2. But there will be a full discussion point on that at Cabinet next week.
Councillor Barnes, John Barnes.
Yes, Chairman. I read this rather like Councillor Cattell, positively at first glance, and I echo what he says about very tight control that Tony and his team keep on our finances. But I don't want to rain totally on the parade, but I have to point out that a major part of what looks like a saving isn't. Effectively, what we've done is postpone spending on capital about £500,000. If now that goes ahead in the current year, then obviously we've gained a bit of time, but we won't actually have gained that much by way of the medium-term financial strategy. So, yes, there is good news here. It's not quite as good as it looks at first sight, and I think that's quite important to bear in mind. But nevertheless, congratulations to Tony and the team.
Tony wants to come in there.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Barnes is absolutely right about the timing issue, and that is spelt out in the report. He's also stolen my thunder a little bit for the what I was going to say about the Q1 forecast, because the same issue around net financing costs occurs in Q1 as well. I think it's worth bearing in mind also that we set the detailed budget around about November, December each year. So there are 3 months that elapse before the commencement of the financial year, and then there's another 12 months after the financial year is finished. So trying to predict these numbers is extremely difficult at the best of times. It's hard work, but it's even more difficult to do in such times of such uncertainty. But Councillor Barnes does make a very good point, and he's absolutely correct. So what we are going to be doing as part of the medium-term financial planning process this year, and as part of the budget process, if you like, we're going to do what we've always done in every year. We're going to do what I've called an affordability review, and I've made reference to that in the Q1 monitoring report. So we can almost, like, if you like, start with a clean slate where the capital programme and the financing of it is concerned, because there are so many things that have changed. Interest rates have gone up, for example. We've now got the economic crisis which is biting hard, and we didn't really know what that was going to be when we set the budget back in December. We had a clue around rising energy costs, but the rest of it was pretty difficult to forecast back then. So we will be doing an affordability review. That's not just on the capital programme, that's on the revenue budget as well. And I should say that that's actually not anything different to what we've ever done in previous financial years. We always do that affordability review as part of the medium-term financial process. But what's really driven it now and what has brought it into much sharper focus is the fact that we do have the current global economic, or the current economic crisis. We do have the interest rates steadily increasing. We do have the situation in Eastern Europe as well. So all of those things are bringing to bear, are bearing down upon us, and it's clearly a very sensible thing to do to review the medium-term plan at this point in time. But as I say, it's just brought it into sharper focus rather than we're doing something that we've never done before. This is what we always do. So you all, sorry, it's a bit of a long-winded response to Councillor Barnes' excellent point. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Clark.
Yeah, I'd like to return to the subject of the Lion Gate roundabout, because that damn roundabout has been in my blooming mailbox about 20 years, and highways have always said they're only responsible for the sight line, and then when the overgrowth gets so high, I ring them up and say, health and safety issue, the traffic view has been obscured going roundabout, and they come and do a cut. And then within about 5 weeks, it's exactly where it was before. So we've been held hostage here, I think, to a degree, because unless they clear this invasive plant and dig the damn thing out, we're not going to move forward. And I'm getting worried it's just going to get kicked down the road, and they're not going to cooperate, and it's just going to go on and on. It really does concern me that we can't get any commitment of actual date when they're going to be on site and clear this invasive plants, and when we're going to move forward. It just seems like we've thrown our hands up and said, oh, well, not going to move forward with this.
I think, to be fair, that's on the Cabinet agenda for next Monday, so that might be worth turning up there, Charlie, and having your say there as well. Right, if we're all done, somebody happy to move this one? Councillor Cook?
Yes, happy to move it.
Good. Seconder? Councillor Courtell, all those in favour? That's carried, thank you very much. Item 8, Revenue Budget Capital Programme Monitoring, as at Q1, pages 121 to 128. There you go. Again, this is resolved report to be noted. Tony.
Thank you, Chair. So this is, as you say, this is a report for noting the Q1 forecast for the financial year 22-23, and the headline story at the moment is that we from the £3.2 million that we had planned to take out of reserves, we're currently forecasting that we'll need £347,000 less than that at this point in time. And forecast capital outturn is £69 million, well below the £111 million budget, but I want to say something, well, I've kind of already covered it, but I'll say a little bit more about that in a second. Council tax and business rate collection rates, they're pretty much on a par with the same point in time last year. But I think it is worth bearing in mind that I think our rates last year held up very well, and we came through the other side of the several lockdowns and the pandemic, and that was a really good news story. Now we have a different challenge. We're facing a different challenge and a different set of circumstances, and I have nothing to indicate any different at the moment. The collection rates, as I say, are holding up, but it may well be, and members need to be aware of this, it may well be, as the financial year rolls out, that those collection rates start to fall as the cost of living crisis bites harder. I don't know at the moment. Obviously, it's something that we will keep reporting to members during the year. So the revenue forecast, it's detailed in Appendix A. And again, I won't go through all the reasons there. I'm sure members have read that. But the big item, the one that really stands out, is the net financing costs. And I did explain that a few minutes ago, that trying to set that budget is notoriously difficult at the best of times. And there's been so many changes as the pace of the programme, increasing rates and so forth. So, yeah, we have got an underspend there. We are forecasting an underspend there, and we will recalibrate those numbers as part of the MTFP process going forward. Just one sort of glimmer of positivity, I suppose, in the gloom of rising interest rates is that we now, of course, are getting a better than expected income from our other investments, not just our property funds, but our call accounts. And we think that will add around about £190,000, or give the council around about £190,000 more worth of income. Again, when I set the budget last year, rates on call accounts were around about the 0.05% mark, so they were worth virtually nothing. But we're now talking around about returns of, I think it's about 0.7%. So that's quite a healthy return from zero anyway. So that is a good news story for the council. In paragraph 11, we have received more ad hoc grants, not much, but we have received more. As I say, the main one is we've got £47,000 from the DLUHC for the administration of the £150 council tax rebate scheme. And that does make, as I've said before, I've moaned about this many times before, it makes financial planning very difficult. But in fairness to the DLUHC, they kind of face the same challenges that we do in that they have to react quickly to decisions made. And the £150 council tax rebate scheme, for example, that was announced in the March budget settlement. So as difficult as it is to manage, I do have some sympathy with the central government departments sometimes in the way that they have to administer grants. So the capital programme, so Appendix B refers there. As I said earlier, we want to do an affordability review of the capital programme. We will do that as part of the MTFS. We will also be reviewing the slippage from the 21-22 financial year. And I think the way that we report the capital programme going forward will look to make it a little bit more transparent around where the costs have fallen and where they're going to fall. What you have in front of you is what we've always given you, which is a report in year on the in-year budget, which is fine. But it would be good, I think, for members to understand it on a more project-wide basis, because most projects don't just start and finish within the same financial year. They will start in prior years and finish in later years. So we will try and finesse the reporting to bring that to members' attention in future monitoring reports. So collection fund performance, as I said, the rates are comparable, but beware, there's some rocky times ahead, I sense, in that respect, and members do need to be aware of that. And again, just to make the point, delivery of the property investment strategy and delivery of the financial stability programme is still of paramount importance. I'm afraid that hasn't gone away, and a review of the MTFS, a review of the medium-term financial plan, rather, that's not going to dissipate that need. It will still be there. So that's it, Chair, for me, and I'm happy to field any more questions.
Thank you. It sort of makes you think, you wonder, when government announced sort of how many hundreds of millions of pounds in a grant scheme, how much of that actually goes to the people who need it, and not saying that Tony and his gang doesn't need it, they've got to do the work, but, you know, the sort of the man in the street who needs the help, how much percentage, you do wonder how much percentage of the hundreds of millions actually gets to where it wants to get before it goes through various organisations who have to take a bit out to administrate it. It has to happen, but you sometimes wonder. Tony?
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, Councillor Cook is waiting to ask a question, but I will come back to that point in a minute, if I may.
Councillor Cook.
Thank you. This probably is going to be a very silly question, but under where we've taken on properties, recently, when I first came onto the council, Rother District Council acquired the Market Square in Battle, and recently it acquired the Sainsbury site. I wondered where the income from that is shown on this accounts, please.
Yeah, Chair, it's in the net revenue budget. So if I just find the report, it will be... Bear with me a second, Chair. If we look at Appendix A, it will be in the line acquisition, transformation and regeneration line. So the income will be in that line there. And I can confirm we've budgeted for, we've budgeted for the Market Square income because we've had that property for some while now. The Buckhurst Place one we didn't set a budget for because we didn't actually purchase the property until I think it was April, but it was certainly well after the the budget was actually set by council. So that will be a additional over and above the budget this year.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions? Tony, do you
Sorry,
want to
Chair,
come back?
before I forget, what you're saying about where the money, how the money is dished out by the DLUHC. Very often, grants are, there is a formula that sits behind the grants. In fact, there is always a formula that sits behind the grants, and whether that formula is correct or not. I mean, for example, the council tax rebate scheme, I don't know what the formula was, but it will be based on things like how many council taxpayers we may have in the district, and central government has all that data because they collect it off us every year. So there is always a formula that sits behind it. Whether it targets the right people or not, or the right geographical areas or not, is perhaps open to debate. But again, without sounding like I'm apologising for the central departments, sharing out those sort of sizes of money in a fair and even manner is no mean task. And to pick up on your first point, yes, we're very grateful when we get the money.
Any other questions for Tony? No. Someone want to move the recommendation that the report be noted? Councillor Cook, thank you.
Happy to move, Chair.
Councillor Cortell seconded. Thank you. All those in favour? That's carried. Thank you very much. Right, back to item 5. You can't go home yet, Tony. Town Hall Renaissance. So if we go back to page 1.
Could I just ask whether before getting on to this very lengthy item, we could have a 5-minute comfort break?
Yep, okay, we'll take 5 minutes. Happy with that? Louise, is the machine sorted? Okay, councillors, we may as well get on. We've had a 10-minute break, so Councillor Maynard's not back yet. He's just out there getting himself some water, so that's fine. Right, agenda item 5. For anybody watching on the live feed or the YouTube, purpose of this report to present a detailed business case for the redevelopment of the Town Hall site, with a view to gain approval to progress the project, subject to planning permission, to a construction site phase, assigning the full and final budget. Officer recommendations: be it resolved that 1, Cabinet be recommended to approve the business case with any amendments as suggested by this committee, and recommend to full council any amendments to the capital programme to reflect the proposed budget of £14.998 million. Second recommendation, Cabinet be recommended, subject to full council approval of the scheme, to give delegated authority to the Director of Place Climate Change, or BIN, to procure the construction contractor required and enter into any other contracts as necessary for completion of the project works. 3, Cabinet be recommended, subject to full council approval of the scheme, to give delegated authority to Director of Place and Climate Change, BIN, to enter into pre-lease agreements with potential tenants to ensure that space within the new office space is tenanted upon opening, and 4, all delegations be subject to final affordability check to be conducted by Chief Financial Officer or Tony. So that's where we are. Just as a reminder, this is the largest in the 20-some-odd years I've been with this council. This is by far the largest project, at nearly 15 million quid, that we're doing. So obviously we're going to have a good talk about it and see. So, Ben, I suppose.
Thank you, Chairman. So the Town Hall Renaissance project represents a once-in-a-generation opportunity to create a new civic heart for the whole Rother community. This scheme addresses 4 key issues presented by the current Town Hall and the adjacent buildings. Firstly, whilst the Town Hall is one of Rother's greatest heritage assets, it's also one of our long-term liabilities. Annual repair and refurbishment bills have averaged in excess of £100,000 over the last few years, demonstrating the continued deterioration of this building. That is a bill that is met and will continue to be met by the tax contributions of all Rother residents and businesses. Whilst we do what we can with our in-house team, external and internal repairs will continue to be undertaken to ensure compliance with statutory requirements. Secondly, and addressing this committee in the midst of an unprecedented heatwave, it's undeniable that climate change is here. The building emits over 100 tonnes of carbon equivalent annually and makes it the council's biggest direct operational contributor to climate change, with staff mileage in second place at approximately 70 tonnes. Rother District Council have declared a climate emergency, and it is therefore imperative that as an organisation we lead the way and address our own carbon emissions. Thirdly, the Town Hall is the only significant employment site opportunity in the town centre. With the ability to host up to 250 full-time equivalents and even more individual jobs in a hybrid working environment, this scheme will deliver significant economic benefits, including bringing higher wage jobs into the town centre, providing further benefits to existing town centre businesses. Following the recent member briefing on the proposed design, Councillor Ganley raised the prospect of determining the benefit-cost ratio for this project. As such, we will now undertake a full economic appraisal in preparation for September's Cabinet, outlining the economic benefits to both the immediate and wider communities. Lastly, whilst we could address the town centre employment, the building's repair needs and our climate impact through other schemes or interventions, this represents the only opportunity to achieve these aims at no cost to the taxpayer. Through the creation of 2,168 square metres of new office space, this project offers the chance to earn £525,000 per annum in rental income to offset the borrowing cost for the completion of the works. Following the recommendations made by this committee to Cabinet, the Council will undertake a 4-week period of public engagement. Building upon previous engagement sessions and questionnaires which provided roundly positive responses, we wish to understand what public opinion on these proposals, including the rationale, the risks and the business case. The results of this will then be reported to Cabinet for their consideration, along with those recommendations from this committee. The scheme is obviously a large commitment by this Council, and no project on this scale is without risk. But the risks of doing nothing are equally prevalent, and therefore we are in the position of, if not this, then what? Thank you, Chairman. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Ben. Well, there we are. We've heard all that. Who wants to kick off? Councillor Barnes. Why am I not surprised?
I want to talk later in broader terms about the project, but I have a question at this stage, which is about the car parking and what the current number of spaces is and what the proposed number of spaces is. I ask with even more urgency because one of the papers for us still shows car parking in the front of the building because it's a reproduction of the East Sussex scheme. Is that the case? Because as I understood the presentation made to us, that was going to be a garden, not car parking. So we forfeited, if I've got the number right, another 17 car parking spaces. We were already forfeiting some under the Sussex scheme. But getting the comparison of those car parking spaces is the question I want resolved at the moment.
That one, Ben, or should we?
Yeah, so I think it was always recognised that any car parking spaces that exist out the front at the moment were going to be lost as a result of either this or the Sussex project. That those parking spaces would effectively become sort of drop-off spaces or particularly for disability access and so on and so forth. But in terms of staff car parking that we have at the moment out there, it was envisaged that wouldn't be the case anyway. In terms of overall parking, I think there's 42 spaces in the new design. That is a loss, but not a significant loss. I think it's about a 20% reduction on what's there already. And obviously included in that is proposed that we have a number of electric vehicle charging spaces specifically for that purpose. So we recognise that there is a reduction in parking capacity. However, there is a significantly underutilised car park round the corner at Wainwright Road, which could be utilised by those accessing this building. It's literally less than a 2-minute walk if you sort of come through Victoria Drive.
Thank you. I can see where Councillor Barnes is coming from to a degree. I know you don't build buildings to have a car park, but this town hall does serve the district, which is 200 square miles. I can see his point there. If it's a district-wide building and people travelling a fair distance to get here, such as Councillor Barnes and myself, less parking could be bad. Or, I know we encourage people to come via public transport, but depending on the time of the meeting that goes on as tonight, I might still be here in the morning if I'd come by train. So there's a point there. Anybody else? Must be somebody's got some. Oh, that got it going. Right, who was first? I'll go with Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. Since we've started this Renaissance scheme, you've sort of had to try and keep it in perspective, because the original application we looked at was possibility of flats. Even with a business offices, those people work there are going to need somewhere to park. They're going to come work there. And I think parking is a real issue. And the other thing is, what is the business case for a cafe when you've got 26 cafes in Bexhill, you've got a load of establishments that sell sandwiches and cakes, including Boots and Sainsbury's, and also, would that mean we'd lease out the cafe and somebody would have to run it as a tenancy? And also, where is the parking for the people who want to come to the cafe? I can't see how we can change the infrastructure around Amherst Road in front of the building much. I know we're supposed to be having a scheme with the East Sussex County Council. We're going to improve that. But where's the budget for that? Are they prepared to do it before the project starts? There's so many, to me, bits of jigsaw that for me are not fitting at the moment. But maybe I'm trying to run before I can walk. I don't know.
I think there was a few questions in there. I think, because it's something that's going to be raised, I think, time and time again, I just want to be very clear about what the East Sussex County Council scheme is and how it's funded and what decisions have been made thus far. So the East Sussex County Council scheme provided two options for the front of the town hall. One was retaining the existing roundabout, but with some public realm uplift, improvement of the paving, the planting, and ensuring that, as sort of following those public realm principles of making it much more appealing. The other is the one that I've included within the pack, which is the priority junction with Buckhurst Place and London Road. The latter, the priority junction, is one that we as a council have sort of promoted with the Sussex County Council, but it still remains their decision. It's not something that can be guaranteed upon. However, the results of the public consultation that they held were non-conclusive. It wasn't strong one way or the other as to what the public feeling was, and therefore the feedback that we've had is that they want to wait to see whether or not we're looking to progress a scheme here with the town hall before they make a final decision on theirs. It will be down to the lead member for Transport and Environment at the County Council to make that decision. It is fully funded by local growth fund and community infrastructure levy contributions, that part of the scheme. So that's fully funded. In terms of the cafe, as we said, we've said sort of in previous member engagements through the design process, the initial expectation is that we might be able to rent that space out to a local operator who would come in and do that. We don't envisage it being a challenge to the Delaware Pavilion. It's not that sort. It's about facilitating those who are working in the building, those who are working in the local vicinity. It's not going to be a fully serviced kitchen with, hot meals and that you might see in larger larger venues. We're talking about coffees, pastries, sandwiches, that sort of thing available, and it'd be run by an independent operator who would lease that space. If that's not financially viable as a business model, then that space is flexible enough to revert to more semi-public uses or workspace uses, i.e., making it a public workspace for people to come in who are using the building to meet and socialise as well. So there is opportunity with that, and the whole point about all of the design elements that we've included, and I know we're not getting into design too much in this meeting, but is that flexibility is built in, the opportunity to change and use spaces in a different way should the initial anticipation not be realised.
Councillor Cortell.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a number of points to raise. First, if I may comment on parking, I fully support Councillor Barnes's concern. As Ben said, we have an additional 250 full-time equivalents likely to be using the part of the complex that we're renting out, and to reduce the number of spaces when we have that sort of increase, I don't think is wise. I understand the climate arguments and I'm passionate about climate change, but I think that in practice people will use their cars to come a long distance, and the result of that will be enormous complaints on neighbouring streets where they'll be taking up resident spaces. And I particularly have an interest in this because there'll be streets in my ward. The cafe, I frankly support. I worked at the head office of a multinational company where there were 1,000 people using the building, and we had some very, very useful interchanges over breakfast or over lunch in the staff restaurant. And I think that having something like that facility, although I realise it's not a fully fledged restaurant, will be very useful in terms of networking. To get on to the issues I wanted to raise, first of all, design. I did read in paragraph 7 of Ben's report that we shouldn't be focusing on design in this meeting. I've got reservations about this. The original decision, and I'm reading from the minutes of the February 2021 meeting, resolved that subject to council approval of the budget, the head of acquisitions, transformation and regeneration be granted delegated authority to procure the services required and enter into contracts as necessary for the completion of detailed designs. Now, that is in terms of procuring the designs. I don't think it means that the head of acquisitions and regeneration, transformation, or now the director of place and climate change is granted the authority to take the sole decision on design. There was a consultation recently, and that attracted 66 responses. That is 0.15% of the population of Bexhill. There were 3 days' notice for this, and it only ran for 5 days. And I think there's a need to extend the design side of the consultation so as to ensure that we have much broader views on many more comments than 66 people who participated. I have some concerns as a councillor for Central Ward Bexhill concerning comments from local people that I've had that were investing on a vast project while local residential streets, particularly London Road, like the corner, around the corner, need a spruce up. I understand that at the time of the previous administration, some residents of London Road were threatened with legal action unless they spent considerable amounts of money, and they were talking over £100,000 each, to spruce up the front of their properties. That was so as to improve the gateway into Bexhill. That I was unaware of this as a local councillor until the last few weeks. These residents are asking me, well, if you're going to spend £15 million on the town hall, surely you can spend £1 million or £2 million on our street to repave it, get it up to scratch. And obviously, that's not a project for us, it's a project for East Sussex. But there is a certain amount of resentment. To move on to, I've got my headings here are finance, staff satisfaction survey and carbon footprint calculation. I will mention the carbon footprint first. I note what the tonnage that we are using at the moment in the town hall, approximately the equivalent of 50 properties. Are we having a calculation presented to us of what the tonnage saving is with all the new proposals, and how we are getting to a carbon neutral position? I haven't seen any background figures to this, so that's one of my concerns. Staff satisfaction survey, yes, it has indicated the majority of staff are happy to spend 2 or 3 days a week in the office and some time at home. That's great. That does create a saving on the Rother side of the carbon footprint, or at least, a saving on the number of desks. But they will be consuming heat while they're at home. And is that being put into the carbon footprint calculation? I also noticed a comment on the staff satisfaction survey concerning a couple of residents. One was worried about his mental health, and another was concerned about the loss of his desk. And that particular guy said that was the final straw. I hope that the minority of staff who do have concerns will have their concerns addressed. Now, to get on to finance. Pages 86 and to 88 of the report.
Councillor, can I just interrupt? Do you want Ben to sort of take a point as you go, or do you want to?
I don't mind. I'm happy to pause and let him talk.
To be honest, I'm starting to lose track of where I am with it. So I've got a few answers. Sorry, Chairman. I've got a few answers in regards to the first point that you made regarding the authority to move to proceed with the design. I refer back to the minutes in which it was said next steps would be to appoint the relevant architects, engineers, consultants, surveyors and other professionals to work up detailed proposals and achieve planning permission on the site. So it was made clear in the original recommendation that the ambition was to take this through to planning permission from that perspective. In terms of the action that was taken on London Road, that was a standardised planning enforcement action for a failure to maintain certain elements of property. I would say, in fairness to East Sussex County Council, exhaustive work was done as part of the London Road gateway work, which resulted in the proposals for the Beeching Road roundabout, the Sackville Terminus Road roundabout, and the Buckhurst Place Square. And it was determined at that time that the necessary budget required to do the works that would lift up London Road to a standard where it was, sort of worth the intervention, if you like, just wasn't available at that time. And so prioritisation took place, and it was determined what can be best achieved with the limited available funds for that project. We were part of those discussions, and obviously continue to push design works on London Road. But you have to face what can realistically be achieved there, given the extent of the highway versus private land and the resultant outcomes there. We've got the carbon reduction you mentioned. We don't have a current calculation for what the carbon impact of the new building will be, because we can't do that until we get beyond the planning design work and go into the technical design phase, at which point we can undertake an SAP assessment, which will give us a much better understanding of the carbon impact of the new building and the thermal efficiency of the new part of the building. Also, it's yet to be determined exactly the extent of the impact that the proposed NFIT works would have on the old part of the building. In terms of the staff survey, yes, we of course take all elements of those engagements seriously, and through line management we try to support staff in every which way possible. But I think the general result of that is clear, that most people would look to work in the office between 2 and 3 days a week, with some favouring 1 and 2 days and some favouring on the more side of sort of 4 or 5 days. I don't know what that says. It says parking. Yes, we accept the fact that there's a reduction in parking. We accept that means that it will put pressure on that car park in particular. As I said before, there is the Wainwright Road car park, which is just across the road, which is significantly underutilised at this stage. The proposed charges that have been included at a later date as part of the income generation would match that of Wainwright Road. We'd have a permitting system in place, I'm sure, in which, for example, if there were a planning committee meeting, we would reserve bays for planning committee members, etc. It's an operational matter that would be determined down the line to make sure that those sorts of things would easily overcome. But fundamentally speaking, this remains the most sustainable location for business growth in the district in terms of its transport and accessibility. Its closeness to population, the number of bus routes available, the number of train stations available. There's no other location in the district that has that level of sustainable access. That's as far as I've got.
Would you mind, Councillor Corten, if I took a few other members first, and then otherwise you're seen to be, if you're hogging, if you know what I mean. I've got Councillor Maynard. I've got a number of names, so you have to be patient.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Can I just confirm before I take the conversation further, for the sake of the webcast, the number of people that we think will be working, as I think Councillor Cortell reported, that we think will be working as part of the leased area? It's 200 and how many?
So the leased area under the HCA guidance prior to the pandemic would be capable of sustaining 250 full-time equivalents.
Thank you. I think Councillor Cortell said 225, but let's not split hairs. So that's well over 200 people that will be coming in addition to the current people working here. So if we're able to do that, we're creating Hastings Direct too, aren't we? In terms of the effect on neighbouring roads, as Councillor Cortell has alluded, and in terms of the fact that I'm not so optimistic that people will choose to park at Wainwright Road car park and then come along to the town hall. I mean, our staff don't do that at the moment, as far as I'm aware. Certainly people visiting the town hall will be expecting to park in the vicinity of the town hall. And let's be absolutely clear, what people are not going to do is park in Wainwright Road car park to come into the town hall for a cup of coffee. That is just absolutely ridiculous. Furthermore, I think actually we're getting our whole approach wrong. And why I think we're getting our whole approach wrong, just in terms of that going for a cup of coffee, is because we previously, when we held the administration, and I think broadly speaking most of the current administration, would agree that the high streets across the country are dying, and actually we want to see Bexhill town centre thrive. We want the traders in Bexhill town centre to thrive. What we should be doing is encouraging staff, whether they be our staff or anybody else that works. For example, we've already got the DWP in Amherst Road. We should be encouraging those people to spend their money in the town centre, because, as you've just said, that is where they will be, and that is where they should be spending their money at lunchtime to make sure that the coffee shops in Bexhill survive. What we shouldn't be doing is trying to cite a coffee shop or a meeting room and pastries, etc. That, frankly, is a folly. It's a folly. It's nothing else but that. We want to see the town centre regenerate. We had the town centre steering group. We've spent funds for the town centre steering group, and I make no apologies for the fact that under the previous administration, yes, we did certainly, after being very, very, we had a light touch approach in terms of encouraging people in London Road to make their properties better. We had a real problem with finding some of the freeholders in London Road to actually make sure that we push that forward. And in fact, Councillor Cortell, I think you would agree, that's exactly what Labour-led Hastings Council did on the seafront in Hastings very successfully, when they went in with quite a heavy hand to make sure, I think they called it the Grotbusters initiative in Hastings, and that was extremely successful there. And even now, we are still faced with a situation whereby, and I declare an interest, Chairman, in terms of being a county council, whereby in terms of that new avenue into Bexhill, I think that what's being proposed in terms of the highway improvements is something that I think residents of Central, in fact residents of Bexhill as a whole, would broadly support. But there are a number of different elements to this project that I'm very concerned about. And in terms of the capital spend, even if, and I say if, we were supportive of this project, I think this is absolutely the wrong time to be doing it. We've heard earlier about the cost of living crisis. We've heard earlier very much how this project has been dressed up as an environmental project. We all would realise every responsible council should maintain the town hall, and clearly there will be specific expenditure, capital expenditure perhaps around new heating facility, for example, because we know that that is a major cost strain in terms of revenue. So some capital investment surely required, and any council would acknowledge that, of whatever political colour. But to spend 15 million right now on this project seems to me to be ill thought through. There is no doubt in my mind whatsoever that the level of public consultation as things stand has been absolutely woeful. To have a public consultation that lasts for five days and we have 66 responses is absolutely woeful. I'm really pleased to hear what Ben said in regard of a later conversation and consultation with members of the public. But the fact of the matter remains, this is the biggest financial commitment in terms of a specific project, aside from Blackfriars, which I think is very different, but this is the biggest financial investment that this council has ever proposed. And ordinarily, we talked about earlier on in the agenda about the anti-poverty strategy, and there was a 6-week consultation. Why on earth haven't we done that now? Why on earth are we trying to rush through this project and not properly engaged with the residents, not only of Bexhill, but the residents who would be paying for this project? So that's residents in Battle, that's residents in Burwash, that's residents across the whole of the 199 square miles that make up Rother. It's incomprehensible to think that we haven't gone out to parishes, for example, and actually told them exactly what's happening, whereas we've had briefings as councillors as recently as last week around some of those design elements. The sands have shifted even since Cabinet awarded some £460,000 to spend on the feasibility study, because the fact of the matter remains, originally the project was meant to be about housing as well, not just about creating a new hub in the town centre. I make no apologies for making, quite searching remarks and searching questions about this subject, because I think right now, when, as Councillor Coleman alluded to earlier, we've got this cost of living crisis, and I do think we're misrepresenting the situation when we try and make out that this council chamber and indeed council buildings are like some overly polluting Chinese industrial building. It is not that. Let's just look at what we've spent so far. I believe it's £303,000 in terms of that feasibility study. How many homes could we have insulated in Rother with that £303,000? How many homes could we have insulated as a council policy if we spent £1 million? Because I can tell you now, the carbon saving would be far greater if we went out with a positive policy of insulating homes rather than this flag waving that we're seeing here by the current administration around a redevelopment of this town centre building. That's me for a start off, and I'll come back later. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Maynard. Anything you wish to try and answer there, Ben?
Not really. I mean, just to get into a couple of bits, really. Obviously the big difference between the town hall site and the Hastings Direct site would be that the civil parking enforcement is obviously enforced in the town centre area and the central ward area, which means actually parking in and around the streets around here is probably more problematic than it is trying to park down Collington Avenue and going into that workspace there. I mean, the only other thing I would say is obviously 250 additional jobs brings with it additional spend in the town centre over and above probably the 40 people that we have turn up here at this council building most days working for the council. So it's that's it really.
I always, correct me if I'm wrong, I always thought that we as a council employed around about 200. So are we saying that the staff who come into the office is drastically reduced, and the additional that Councillor Maynard mentioned, the 250 is additional people? I was just thinking that the 250 was our staff and a few more, or is it the other way around? Is it our staff as the few and the additional is the bulk?
Yeah, so we've got about 250 people on staff here at Rother District Council. Most of them, as we said, don't work in the building most of the time anymore. So we've on average seeing between sort of 40 and 80 people coming into the building at one time. Without straying into too much of the confidential items on the agenda, we've anticipated that Rother District Council as an organisation will require about 400 square metres of the new space that's available, which is under the algorithm about 40 employees worth of space. So actually from the 250 employees in the new part of the building, that's just the new part of the building alone, 40 of those would likely be at Rother District Council, which means 210 employees or full-time equivalents as it is that could be hosted by other organisations on a daily basis. We would still continue to utilise space in this building because obviously we've got offices downstairs, we've got offices upstairs that would still continue to be utilised, meaning that the sort of the premium lettable space could be out there generating an income.
So ultimately, as I've read through here somewhere, it's basically the planning department, because we're going to potentially flatten their bit, so they want somewhere to live, wouldn't they? Put it bluntly. I've got a number of councillors. It's all right, Lizzie, I've got your name on the list. You're not on the committee, you have to wait till last. Councillor Mary Barnes.
Thank you, Chairman. In fact, I think Councillor Maynard has covered some of the things that I was going to say. But just speaking as a rural member and watching the video in which the architects described what they were going to do, how they were going to set about it, it was made quite clear that this was a town hall for Bexhill, for the people of Bexhill. I don't think in the whole of that video I heard a single mention of Rother. So this really started a process, I suppose, in the rural area of saying, what is all this about? Have we been consulted? And the answer is no. The consultation was very early on, with just the people who lived locally. You asked them how they felt about it. I remember your report, Ben. I do think it's important that if you're going to branch out on a project which is more expensive than any other project we've ever had, that we really need to incorporate the whole of Rother. We are all part of Rother. We all regard the town hall as our town hall. And I do think that when you're doing consultations, you should remember that there is a vast number of the population of Rother who don't actually live in Bexhill. And I do think that that needs to be picked up and put right, because I think if you're planning to sell it to our electorate, I think you really need to be able to go much further afield than Bexhill.
Yep.
Thank you. I appreciate the comments from Councillor Mrs Barnes as well. I think you're right. I would say that 768 people engaged with the online materials that we put in those 5 days. This next 4-week engagement is rather wide. So the first bit of engagement was purely sort of related to that early stage planning engagement that most developments would go through, and we have to make sure as part of those sort of REBA stages that we really focus those energies on those who are going to be most impacted by the physical environment, so those who are going to experience traffic issues, footfall issues, that sort of thing, changes in their sightlines, etc. This next 4 weeks is much wider than that. It's about the principle of the development, it's about the rationale, the risks involved, the budget that's being made available. It's about people being able to access the information that's being provided tonight, to councillors to scrutinise that for themselves and provide feedback. And the project team have designed a much more in-depth questionnaire about a wider range of issues than just simply about the design impacts. And it's hoped that when we feed that back, obviously, we get far more responses than the 68. We're going to be putting a big push through My Alerts to make sure that we get that information back in as well. I would say we did get 68 responses. I think it was 68 responses from the original consultation, which isn't great in terms of overall numbers, but it does equate to only about half of what we got on the 6-week consultation for our corporate plan, and about half again of what we got on our 6-week consultation for the environment strategy. So the level of engagement comparative to other engagements that sort of more formal consultations that we've done was actually comparatively high given the short time span that was out there. So I do hope that when we get to the next phase of the public engagement that we're going to see a lot more information come back and really gauge public opinion what it is that's trying to be achieved.
That's lovely, but what are you going to tell those people? What are you going to put on My Alerts? Are you going to tell them how much has been spent so far, what you've done, how much you're preparing to spend, what it's going to do for them? What are they going to expect to find when they come into Bexhill? Whether it's going to be an inconvenience to them because they're going to find that they can't access Bexhill because there's building work going on. There's all sorts of things that have to be considered if people are coming in by car. And I think the whole of the project should incorporate everyone, and everyone should be able to use the same information that we're getting as councillors. So, because this is an enormous project, if it all goes pear-shaped, I hope it doesn't, and I know maybe it won't happen immediately because I think there's a lot more consultation to be done. But if it all goes pear-shaped, it's going to affect the whole of Rother, and Rother is going to have quite an input into it eventually, if that does happen. So I think it's kind of be careful how you present this.
I'm going to go to this side, so I'll take Councillor Madeley.
Thank you, Chairman. Firstly, I'd like to say, just in principle, I applaud what we are trying to do, but there's a long way to go. Firstly, and most importantly, why on earth, well, I do know why on earth, but I'm going to ask the question anyway, do you pick August again to go out to a consultation of the public, which is only being able to be received online in August when everybody's away, or most people are away, or shut down, is my first question. I have a question on para 26, stated that the total has suddenly become 650,000, and this is for part of the initial planning. Included is aborted works costs. What are they? That might be one for Tony, I'm not sure. And can I have clarification, please, at the moment, on para 16 and a line to our meeting the other evening? I've heard two sides. A, both projects, in other words, the refurbishment and the new build will take place together. And I've also heard the new build will go ahead first and the refurbishment will follow at some time afterwards. So that's another one. And regarding the cafeteria or cafe or whatever, yes, 24 cafes and eateries in Bexhill must be helped and must be encouraged to survive in the town centre, as Councillor Maynard has already said. We need perhaps sort of coffee points, or, you know, I can call it kettle points within the building so that people can at least get a cup of coffee or a cup of tea. But otherwise, I think they do need fresh air and they should be able to go out and, you know, go to Sainsbury's or go across the road or go down to the seafront and have a walk and pick up a salami, whatever, but not use up space in the town hall. I'll leave it at that stage at the moment. Thank you.
I think the figure that Tony would have probably have put in of 650,000, if we don't go ahead, is because we would have spent the money on the architect's fees and the agent's fees and the structural engineering and the planning and everything else. And if we then stopped and didn't go ahead, then that is no longer an asset but a loss. I think that's basically right, isn't it, Ben?
There's a couple of bits. I mean, firstly, on the 650,000, you're right. In terms of the costs associated with your design team, these are done on a basis of a percentage of the overall project. So you pay your architects on the basis of on the cost of the overall project. So if you don't progress beyond a certain stage, then you still have to pay them those costs, even though that cost benefits a later stage in the programme. There was also a couple of areas of works, including a number of ecological and ground stability surveys, amongst a number of other things that we had to undertake in order to progress the design further. So, for example, bat surveys. We had to do some ground stability surveys because whilst there's an existing building here, we had no idea whether or not the ground underneath that bit there could sustain a 2,500 square metre building put on top of it rather than two villas. So there's a number of additional works that had to be carried out to get us to that point. So there is some of that is related to additional stuff that we've brought in to the project, but primarily it's down to the sort of costs linked with things like the design team, which relate to sort of later phases of the programme, but you're still liable for if you don't go beyond REBA 3, which is the sort of planning permission stage.
I would assume that you'd like to think that the next door buildings weren't built on a bog. But you will never know if you can't put something 5 times bigger up. All right, what have we got here? Let's have a look. I'll go Councillor Coleman.
Thank you, Chair. I think first of all, I'm really glad that this is finally here in Scrutiny, because I think it's really important we scrutinise it. I think members from across the council have already and will be scrutinising this. Although, Councillor Maynard, for a second I thought you were trying to join in with the Conservative leadership debates at one point with your speech, but there were some important points you made nonetheless. I think it's important that we look at the principles behind why this is happening before we start scrutinising it. Even things like, DDA compliance making sure that the building is accessible for people and staff with disabilities. That is a fundamental thing that we have to address, whether it's this project or something else. Staff welfare. I mean, we're not just talking about better office and better conditions, better heating, etc., but things like having an area to socialise, to mix, whether that is, a cafe, the rooftop space. These are really important things that make a difference. And I see Councillor Maynard's shaking his head, but he should know that happy staff are a more effective staff, are more efficient staff, and expecting them to come and sit in rabbit hutches day in, day out is not going to get the best out of our staff. It's not going to get the best satisfaction from them. I think if we look at the anti-poverty strategy that we've just passed through to Cabinet, there are some opportunities within this project to actually address some of the aims of that anti-poverty strategy. So, for one of the big things in the anti-poverty strategy is about this community hub space, this central point where residents of Rother can go to receive help from multiple agencies. The civic centre part of this plan could be that space. A space where if someone is in trouble and they don't know where to go, they think, well, I'll go to the town hall because there's a chance that I might get help there. I know Councillor Maynard again is shaking his head because he's not used to residents coming to the town hall for help, because under his administration the town hall was, no, don't bother with Rother, but we want people to bother with Rother.
Chairman, I think I'd ask you to strike that comment. It's frankly pathetic.
Can we just stick to the point? I don't need political points going back and forward. Let's get on.
I'll get back on track with what I was trying to say.
The position we're on now. Thank you.
So as I was saying, I think that community hub space is really vital. From talking to community groups in the anti-poverty strategy, so many of them were calling out for that central space, that central hub. If there is a place where we can be as, for example, Hark, who provide benefits advice, where they can also put someone forward to someone, a representative from East Sussex, or a representative from the Food Bank, or a representative from Rother, or the CAB, all of these organisations in one space, then this would be the place to do it. And what a better place to do it than a friendly environment, an environment that feels a bit like a cafe, rather than feeling like some sort of place where you're going to get reprimanded for not paying your taxes or not filling in your benefits forms properly. Then if we also look at the climate emergency that we've all declared as a council, aside from the obvious points about energy efficiency and carbon reduction, the solar panels, the clean energy production, all of that, again with the cafe as an idea, well, I tell you one thing we haven't got in Bexhill, and one thing that wouldn't be competing with our cafes, is we haven't got a 100% plant-based cafe in Bexhill. Councillor Mayor again laughing at my points. It's quite distracting. Maybe he should listen, because if he went to the carbon efficiency training and was carbon literate, he'd know that a plant-based diet is one of the quickest ways to reduce your carbon footprint. So if we had a plant-based cafe and we grew the fruit and vegetables on the rooftop, we could have a cafe that is self-sustained, that is cooking food from the council to provide to our staff. And again, back on the anti-poverty point, vouchers. If we could provide vouchers to people that come into our town hall to go and get a cup of coffee, to go and get a sandwich from our council cafe, the difference that would make to their experience of the town hall would be immense. If we have members of staff who are struggling financially, the ability to say to them, if you tag your staff card, you'll get a discount because you're a member of staff. Those little things make a difference. Those little things make a difference. And if we are concerned about taking business away from local businesses, and I understand that point, it is a valid point to make, why not invite local food businesses to host little pop-up sessions on a rotational basis in this cafe? That could be an idea. The different cafes could come in one at a time, set up their stocks to some degree, serve this huge population of the council bit by bit. That could be an idea. These are all things that we need to think about, ways to make this space work. But ultimately, it is about that social space. And some members of this council clearly aren't that bothered about staff having a place to socialise interdepartmentally. But I guarantee you it will make a real difference. Now, I know some of these are sort of tertiary points. But we need to make sure that this design is as best as it can be. We need to make sure that the heritage assets are preserved. I think that's important. And we need to have considerations for how civil service buildings are changing. And we need to make sure that this will actually be cost neutral in the long term, and that it won't just be a big cost on the council forever that will eventually affect people's council tax bills. And we also need to bring the public along with us, and I agree with the comments about the consultation. I think we need to regain control of the comms on this, because I think people have been misled on this project, both in a negative way, in terms of some people thinking that we're spending millions on offices for councillors. I've been told that several times by my residents. Why are you spending money on offices for yourself? I don't plan on having an office in this building. I think a lot of people don't realise that councillors don't actually have offices. So things like that we just need to address. But we also need to make sure we are transparent, that we're consulting fairly, and that we're not making things seem rosier than they are, because it is important that we bring the public along with us. I think on the parking point, and this is my final point, you'll be glad to know, Chair. Yes, we need to make sure there are sufficient parking spaces. But if we're also talking about improving bus services into the town centre and improving cycle routes into the town centre, and we're expecting our staff to take a leading role in taking those buses, in riding those bikes, and in using those more green and climate-friendly ways of transporting themselves, we need to bear that in mind in this design. Otherwise, we're going to be left with lots of white marks on tarmac that aren't being used, because actually a lot of the staff are now getting the bus in because they actually have a decent bus service, or they're riding their bike in because they actually have a decent cycle path. So I really think we need to look at this in the long term. But I do understand some of the concerns, and I look forward to hearing more scrutiny from everyone else. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Chief Executive, you wish to come back?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I don't wish to cut short discussion on the cafe, and I know why people have raised it. I mean, one of the issues in the recommendations are, any amendments you wish to make. The cafe space was seen as flexible working space and flexible space. I think the views of members have been well made tonight. There are those who think it's a good idea, those who think it's not a good idea, those who have a view on what food it should serve, whatever. But I think it's important that we look at this project. It is more than a cafe in the town hall. That's all I was going to say. So I think we could say that members' comments on the cafe arrangement have been noted, and like I said, please don't take that. It was quite right and proper. It was raised and it's been discussed. But I think we've probably made the point now, and we may come up with another 101 different reasons why we should or shouldn't have it. But the point is that I'm taking from tonight is members have some concern over the use of that space. And are not convinced that is that. We'll take that away. We'll have a look. We can look at what alternative uses we might put that space to, so that we can feed that back in. So thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. I think what we're looking at, I get where we're going. I get the rationale. I get the cost of fuel, the inefficiencies of the building, the cramped space in the planning department, the ramps, the up and down, the DDA. Over the years we put a lift in, only a little bitty lift, but we put a lift in, and we've upgraded the roof on that part of the building and insulated it. And we've spent money on electrics and everything else. But I do get that when we get to a stage, and you think, right, what are we going to do? Are we going to? You probably do it yourself. Are you going to move home, or are you going to refurbish, or are you going to stick a iMac through it? And it's all got to stack up. So I see that we need to upgrade the heating system. That's got to be done. Upgrade the heating system, save fuel. Upgrade the lighting, save energy. Upgrade the insulation, save energy. Do you remove buildings? There's things are changing now, because when we did the climate, whatever we called it, that long day carbon literacy training, the first thing the woman said, the girl said who ran it, concrete is bad, which made me feel bad because I spend my time using concrete and cement. So knocking down buildings is not climate neutral, and building new buildings with concrete floors, as I've read through some of the spec, 4 floors of 12-inch thick concrete using hundreds of tons of ballast and cement, is not carbon neutral. But the wider aspect of it is when you've got something that has a decent envelope and it doesn't leak all its heat out, and it's less aggravation to heat and less aggravation to cool down, and costs you less to run, plus in the long term you haven't got the maintenance, then that's all good. You've just got to think to yourself, is spending 15 million quid a step too far? Could you do something for 5, or could you do something for 10, or do you go the whole hog? The engine's blown up. Let's not mess about. Let's get a new one. So that's sort of where we're looking. So, you know, I think we need to sort of keep our ideas on what we're discussing. Is this the right project? Is the project too big? Will it work? Will it stack up, or will it bankrupt us? End of. Now, I've still got a list of names, so I'm going to come back to a couple of them who have spoken before, but I'm going to go off grid now and go to my fellow councillor, Councillor Hacking. Otherwise, she'll moan at me tomorrow when we're at camera.
I would never moan. And I just thought, with all the officers' spare time, that you'd be delighted to tend to Councillor Coleman's rooftop garden in between your duties. But what I wanted to do was try and condense slightly what Councillor Maynard had said. And I just feel like with this project, there's been a massive sense of urgency, and we've spent a lot of money on it already. Could you just highlight for me what the benefits across the entire district are, and why they're so pressing and immediate as to be taking this project on in such a challenging financial climate?
That's a good question. I think the answer remains a sort of a financial one in twofold, really. Firstly, the financial element of having to sustain this building and its bits in perpetuity without any significant improvements. Even if we do the sort of the lighter touch versions of improvement, you know, changing the heating system, changing the windows, doing improved insulation, etc., that's got to be paid for, and it's how does that then get paid back? And so one of the briefs that was set when we took on this project was to ensure that it was as cost neutral as possible to our revenue budget, meaning that any income that could be any expenditure that we paid out could be matched by income coming in. So that's always been the premise upon which we've worked. So I think, and as I said in the report and in my introduction, you know, this is not a Bexhill building. This is a Rother building, and it's for Rother taxpayers to pay for this building in perpetuity. And so what we're trying to do is sort of look at the longer term, the next 50 years, the next 100 years, and how do we minimise that longer term cost, you know, in terms of energy, in terms of maintenance and repairs, by undertaking a single one-off capital project which can be written down over a period of years and then paid for using additional income generated. The other part, of course, is the sort of the less direct but more sort of leadership aspect of the council, which is about we've set this climate change agenda. We've declared a climate emergency as a council. We have a series of interventions that we're doing in and amongst the district, but fundamentally, until we get our own sort of operational house in order, it's very much about sort of, you know, outwardly rather than looking inwardly at what we're doing. And as I said, the two biggest direct contributors, putting the sort of the more indirect stuff to one side, such as our waste contract, the single biggest contributor to our what you call option 1, option 2 carbon contributors is the town hall building and its operation. So that's the two main things that sort of far less, you know, sort of Bexhill, but far more district wide is that sort of financial liability remains district wide, and obviously our carbon impact doesn't see town or administrative boundaries.
Right. Yeah, it's all right. I've got a list. Councillor Langlands, you're next on the list.
Thank you, Chair. I must admit, I had several questions, but it did occur to me that the one thing that we've said should be at the forefront of everything we do is climate change. And I think I've really reviewed this closely with the view of what we are actually doing to our own carbon footprint, that we seem to be pussyfooting around to a certain degree. The rationale for development in regard to climate change makes reference to only the operational carbon emissions of the development and neglects the assessment of the embodied carbon associated to the demolition and construction of the new building. The Royal Institute of British Architects has advocated halting demolition in order to lower carbon emissions and to help the UK reach its net zero targets by 2050. Buildings should be preserved and repurposed to reduce the whole life impacts. The rationale on climate change can only be fairly assessed via a whole life carbon assessment, which includes the carbon emissions resulting from the materials, the construction, and the use of the building over its entire life, including its demolition and disposal. The assessment should review the proposed development against a deep retrofit alternative, where the existing building is retained but highly upgraded for energy efficiency. London Energy Transformation Initiative estimates that a business-as-usual office building will produce 1 tonne of CO2 per cubic metre of new building. Therefore, unless embodied carbon has been formally addressed, every 100 square metres of construction building will be the equivalent to the town hall's current 104 tonnes annual operation, carbon baseline stated in the application. The rationale for climate change, therefore, cannot be confirmed without these emissions being fully reviewed. Just the construction of the new build, without taking into consideration the demolition and clearance of the site, will create 300,000 tonnes of carbon, which is the equivalent to the carbon emissions of the entire town of Bexhill for 1 year. The strategy dismisses the redevelopment use of the existing building. I would need to understand if any studies were carried out to evaluate this and embodied carbon before it was dismissed and the project removed into a new build strategy. What was the due diligence process followed? I'm not sure what the energy strategy design for the new build proposal, but it would appear it only serves itself and does not have an holistic energy strategy to service the existing town hall or even contribute to the grid. I can see the inclusion of a gas boiler for the town hall at 55,000 on page 45. So I'm a little bit lost as to how we think we are addressing climate change in the way I think we should. If we are going to do this, which I'm not totally against, but I'd want a flagship. I want something that really did address climate change and help to reduce our carbon emissions. And I think I'd feel inclined, if anything, to go higher with the cost at a later date and produce something to be proud of.
Well, you can't knock Councillor Langlands for doing some research, can you? Good luck with that one, Ben.
I mean, I can't confirm the statistics you've given there in regards to carbon, embodied carbon. I can tell you that we are undertaking that as part of our design process. What's the final embodied carbon? That will be part of the overarching carbon impact report we do throughout this process. But again, it comes back to you can't do that until much later down the line in terms of the design process, because you need to understand what the technical design of the building is, what materials are going to be used. And then that in part is informed through the planning process. So, the design team have submitted a whole raft of material proposals, this type of material, that type of material, locally sourced. Of course, it depends on where it comes from, how it's produced, as well as to how much embodied carbon sits within that. And they're looking to do a total report on that. One of the briefs to the design team is to drive down the embodied carbon. They know that as well, and that's part of the design process they're going through into that. The next stage of full technical design that we'll be going into. In terms of what other options, I mean, the previous report back in February 21 did cover off the various options that we addressed as part of that feasibility study, and that included a light touch sort of environmental focused sort of approach, which was about £800,000 worth of investment, and that just about paid for itself in the energy savings that you might make. That didn't include wholesale replacement of the electrical and gas systems. If you were to, so we've got full costings on sort of that NFIT standard for the existing, for the core town hall bit, obviously on the assumption that the design removes the villas, etc. And that comes to about £2.3 million to bring that up to that sort of top level standard, as much as you can do with existing building. Now, if you were to add on to the villas, that and obviously the other bits that we would be looking to lose, you're probably looking well in excess of £3 million to do that work and bring that upgrade in. It doesn't address the issue of income. How are you going to pay for that? Because it's not rentable space. You couldn't rent that space out in a commercial environment. It's not flexible. There's a lot of wasted space in terms of corridors and rat runs, etc. Somebody mentioned about DDA compliance. Well, there are only 3 office spaces that you can use in this building if you are of limited mobility, and that's the chief execs, the deputy chief execs, and my office down the corridor there. And that's because this is the only floor with a disabled access toilet on it. All of these things were considerations in that early feasibility study that was undertaken back in 2020 and then reported back in February 21, which was when the decision to say, okay, well, let's go down with the wholesale redesign process, the wholesale, redevelopment and renaissance that was included, and that's why we've got to where we are now. So I think that it has been considered. We've looked at all that. We're going to do the embodied carbon work, absolutely, and that will come later in the process when we can understand that. But
so will you be looking to make sure that the town hall gets its energy from what is generated within the new build?
As much as is possible. I mean, you mentioned the gas boiler in there. It's because
yes,
whilst the majority of the heating, particularly in the new area, will be undertaken by air source heat pump, when it gets to its coldest points in the year, there's no other choice. There's no other technological choice at the moment to heat this building other than gas. So if we don't do anything, then it will be a better gas boiler that we put in. Absolutely, it'll be the best that you can buy, but it will still be a gas boiler. What this project does is that gas boiler only kicks in when it's absolutely at its coldest, and that air is needed, that heat is needed to heat this part of the building. So it's sort of like a supplementary kick in. Most of the heating throughout the year, even in your sort of winter and spring, sort of autumn and spring periods, is done through the air source heat pumping as much as possible.
Well, I don't want to take any more of Scrutiny's time because obviously their committee needs the floor space. But I would say that actually investigating this in much more depth, and in fact, if you're prepared to have a 5-storey building next door, you could have actually, I would have thought, used the roof of this building to then go back, set it back, and put another 2 stories on here in a really innovative way. And a unique design that retained it. But that's just my personal view. And as I say, just a little bit disappointed that
I think Heritage England might have had something serious
Sorry?
to say. I think Heritage England might have had something very serious to say about that.
No, because that's what's happening in London, so that they can retain these buildings. So they're setting them back and building at the back and renewing them. So it's quite creative, but as I say, I have done some research.
What I'm going to do, I've got a number of councillors here who wish to speak, but Councillor Kirby Green is online and at home, so while she's got her hand up and she might actually have some signal, I take any points you've got, Eleanor, whilst you're there.
Thank you. Actually, a lot of people have actually said what I was going to say, so I'll be very quick. Coffee vouchers, which Councillor Coleman suggests. I'd like to know who's paying for those, given that we're using reserves year on year to actually run our essential services. So, I mean, it's just bizarre. It's just extraordinary what I've been listening to be quite honest. Actually, Councillor Hacking covered exactly what I was going to say. My residents in Burwash, what is this going to deliver for them? And I'm sorry, Ben, but I don't think you answered the question. They're not going to be going for a coffee in the town hall, or if they did, we'll be increasing our carbon footprint because they'll be driving down there. what exactly is going to be the benefit to my residents in Burwash? Because it will be they pay the council tax as well as everyone else in Bexhill. So what is the benefit to them of a town hall? My view is there does need to be some work done on the town hall. I absolutely accept that. My concern is this is going to become a white elephant. It's a vanity project, and I really think actually it's going to backfire on the ruling coalition, because my residents in Burwash and Mountfield and Etchingham and Hurst Green and Ticehurst do not want to be paying for a town hall vanity project which is not going to benefit them at all. So I'd really like to understand what benefit my residents are going to get from this. And there's a comment about, one last thing I want to say, Councillor Coleman made some comment about collaborative working space. Actually, he didn't use that word, I'm using that word, collaborative working space. You know, I don't think planning applications are going to be processed any quicker by having a coffee shop. And that is what my residents want to see. They want to see the core essentials of district councils delivered efficiently and effectively. And I don't think that having a coffee shop, and I know, Malcolm, you said don't mention a coffee shop, but I don't think having a coffee shop and a collaborative working space and a roof terrace is going to help planning applications be processed, council tax being done, and all the core services that we need to do as a council. So, Ben, sorry, I'd like to ask you again, what are my residents in Burwash going to gain from this project? Thank you.
I mean, I can only sort of go back to what's been written in the report, in the sense that residents in Burwash, in Ticehurst, in Hurst Green, in all parts of the district, you know, it's council taxpayers' money that is supporting this building as it is. It's as simple as that. It's, you know, as I've outlined in the report, over £100,000 a year in maintenance and refurbishment just to keep the building compliant. And in terms of, to give some examples of what we've done over the last couple of years, we've had to replace all of the fire doors, we've had to replace the fire alarm system, there's been upgrades obviously to the reception area, but that's not inclusive of all of the ongoing maintenance, which, you know, sort of holes in the roof, holes in the windows, bits falling off, doors, etc. You know, that aren't included in some of these costs because they're just done by our in-house maintenance team. These, you know, it's taxpayers and business ratepayers who are going to be paying for this into the future. The premise of this proposal is to do as much as we can do now to facilitate a neutral revenue position going forward in the medium term, and that's the basic premise of it. Is that by investing into the building now, we can generate an income which will pay for the building's for the cost of the works, to reduce reliance upon taxpayers' money into the future. Because at some point, this work will have to be done. At some point, we will have to replace the boiler system. At some point, the electrics will need upgrading, and it still remains as a physical space. You know, not something that you could lease out onto a commercial market. So that's all I can sort of offer in terms of the specific question. I mean, one thing I would say, Chairman, is obviously we've heard a lot today about consultation. I think there's some genuine concern about consultation. Is it worth at this point maybe saying, look, as an option to revisit the programme, extending the period of consultation and to allow for greater engagement with members of the public to get increased feedback, so that we can bring that back to either to this committee or to Cabinet for further consideration based on what's been said tonight. I'm conscious of, you know, we've obviously got 4 weeks now of engagement where we're going out heavily. We've done some videos, photos of existing buildings, etc. We're putting the whole business plan out there, and we genuinely want to get the public opinion on what's being proposed. And if that requires a bit more time, then we're happy to look at how we facilitate that within the programme, and look to extend that to ensure that there's proper engagement and proper feedback.
Paul, could I come back?
Yep. Just going to invite you.
Just a very quick one. I do understand that we need a new boiler. I do understand we need. I'm not saying that nothing needs to happen. Obviously, maintenance needs to happen on all buildings. You know, if you own a house, maintenance needs to happen. So I don't think anyone is suggesting that it's this or nothing. But replacing a boiler and doing roofing work and replacing windows is a damn sight cheaper than the plans that are suggested. So I suppose I think we need to get away from it's this or nothing. It's not this or nothing. It's this or ongoing maintenance. And I accept that there needs to be ongoing maintenance. But ongoing maintenance obviously becomes a lot, in my view, is a lot cheaper. And even retrofitting the building or something, I would imagine, I'm obviously not an expert, is cheaper than actually the plans. I just think the plans are very grandiose, and I think that they're extremely costly. And I feel that we need to move the argument from, oh, well, it's either this or nothing sort of thing, because that's not exactly the case. We could do a lesser version of what is suggested, in my view. But that's just my view. So thank you.
Thank you, Anna. I got some sympathy with Ben. I know what, as you said, if we do the work that needs to be done, that's cost. That's a cost that we have to bear. So I can see where the officers have gone from and saying, let's go the whole hog, if you like, and then we can get it paid for to a degree by income. So to some extent, it's no different than us going out and buying, a building, as we over the years we've invested for income, and you could argue this is similar. I'm not saying it is, but it's similar. So if we have to spend, on a new boiler, we have to spend on a new boiler. But if we have to spend on a new boiler as part of a wider scope, a wider scheme, and someone's going to pay us to use the offices, then the boiler hasn't necessarily cost us the money, it's cost everybody the money. Do you know what I mean? So am I completely off grid?
That's basically what we're saying is that we're trying to present an option to the council that facilitates this work being done, but in a way that then generates an income for the council to pay off the cost of doing that. It is a big cost. We recognise that, but then it's a big project. It produces a lot of space that can then be utilised. I would say as well, obviously, we do rely quite heavily on and whilst it's out of the scope of what's being presented here today, we do rely quite heavily on the income that's already generated from this site through the Amherst Road site. That is not a sustainable solution either. That building needs significant works to be done to it to make it a fit-for-purpose office into the future, especially one where we can keep tenants in there and ask that they pay any sort of reasonable rent. So that in itself has a very short lifespan as well. And so really what we're just trying to do is present an opportunity and an option here that means all of this work can be done without additional cost burden on our revenue finances.
Chair.
Tony, you're probably going to ask the question before I ask it. So the cost, which the annual cost of say, which is roughly 580 odd thousand pounds per annum. Is that just the interest payments, or is that repayment of the loan? That's repayment.
That wasn't the question I was going to answer either, Chair. So I'm being really pedantic here, and you won't thank me for it, I doubt. But I just do need to pick you up on a point you made a few minutes ago. We don't invest for yield, not primarily. We invest for regeneration purposes, and it's very important that members understand that distinction. So sorry for being a pedant, but it is important.
Right, I'll go back to councillors now. So I've got you now. Councillor John Barnes.
I think what concerns an increasing number of us, as I've read this meeting, and indeed some who are not members of this committee, like Councillor Langlands, is the rush to decision. We're undertaking this project as if somehow it's essential that it's in next year's capital budget. Now, I've real worries about that. I've already highlighted, but if you've got an honest answer to Eleanor Kirby-Green, and her fellow councillor in Burwash I'm already being asked questions about this, we're actually going to make it more difficult for them to come in to the town hall because we're going to lessen the car parking. So for the wider area of Rother, not only are we spending large sums of money, possibly justifiably in the longer term, because you borrow and you repay on a fixed annuity, so inflation is actually on your side over the long term. But we're actually making it less accessible for people who hopefully will, by the time this building's in full operation, may have electric cars, hydrogen cars, will no longer be committing to the carbon footprint, but somehow they will find they can't park, they can't use this building at all. It's already at one end of the county from my ward, and the rail service, to be candid, doesn't work. You have to go into Hastings in order to get to Bexhill, because some idiot in 1962 felled the viaduct. I know Dr. Beeching did it in order to not see his reforms reversed, but he made this place less accessible. And the notion of cycling, either down the A21 or over the ridges that actually are the scenic route to Bexhill, 19 miles, but a lot more when you actually think of the burden on your legs. And we have the most elderly population in the county. A large number of those don't actually drive, but those that do aren't likely to cycle. They're certainly not likely to walk in, and they don't actually find it that easy to get to a railway station, as probably Councillor Mooney's area will confirm. The alternatives were gone into in some depth in 2021, which would basically vacate the entire site and sell it, do something about refurbishing the buildings, which will probably cost you, in revenue terms, about 150,000 a year, about a fifth of what we're proposing to spend. Or we go for this kind of solution, which will, I think, over time, pay for itself. But we're doing it at a time when we're already committed to delivering backfires, which will actually have a major impact on our capital budget itself, because the building programme there is 2023, 2024. Exactly the moment when this project looks to be scheduled, and we are on a declining set of reserves. We've had a better outturn this year than we predicted, but we know the reserves are going to dip below 5 million at some stage before they start rebuilding in 2025, 2026. There is an awful lot to be said for not rushing this, looking quite seriously at the points that Councillor Langland's making, because I too was worried about the use of concrete in the new building. 4 floors of concrete are actually an affront to any real advocate of climate change. I'm worried a little less about the gas boiler, because I do think gas is an interim fuel, but I have to say the prices of gas are likely to stay high for some considerable time. But at the end of the day, why do we need to take a decision this autumn and put it in this coming year's capital programme? Surely we can do a much more serious investigatory job to see how we can improve, get the best value from this project. Councillor Common talked about a social hub. I'm not against that, but again, presumably you're not going to charge them a commercial rent. we talk about, and I've looked at paragraph 18 and 20, and just look at the last sentence of 18 and look at the middle sentences of 20. Pieces of work are going on to assess what our workspace capacity is needed. 20, there's a pilot study. What is yet to be determined is how the hot desking across public sector organisations is going to be operated on a commercial basis. There's a lot of work going on to see how we actually fit into what is the mid-21st century pattern of working. And yet we are not waiting for those pieces of research. We're rushing ahead on certain assumptions which may or may not be justified. Certainly, if you're going to have interoperative working across the public sector organisations, they are going to require cars and they're going to require parking. Because frankly, if you're somebody who works for the Integrated Health Trust in Lewis, you are not actually going to come here by train. You will almost certainly drive because you know the train will go into Eastbourne until they actually do that link. It seems to me that what all of us are saying is not that this is a stupid project, not that there aren't desirable things about it, but really it's the wrong time and it's a bit premature. And I really feel that what I would want to say to the Cabinet in no uncertain terms is don't take a decision yet. More research, more work, wait for those studies, work out what your model is actually going to be, because I frankly am less certain about private sector organisations coming in, but maybe they will. But there are two models really and two pieces of research going on which I would want to see the results of before we decide on the design and exactly how we do this. And I think we are jumping the gun on something which really needs to be a flagship for this century and not actually an echo of last century.
Chairman, can I make a point of order or a point of clarity if it's helpful? Because I think members will thank me of all political persuasions for what I'm about to say. I want to clarify what Ben said earlier. Is he saying another meeting of the Scrutiny Committee before Cabinet? Because if that is the case, we can curtail this meeting. Or, you know, because there are, I think, a number of other issues that people want to raise. But I have to say, across the political spectrum, I want to echo the comments that Councillor Barnes just made. I think people feel this has not been discussed thoroughly enough. And I know the residents of Rother feel this hasn't been discussed thoroughly enough. And I think a proper public scrutiny will require another meeting. And I just want to pick up on the comment that Ben made. If we're having that long consultation, to look at those consultation responses by scrutiny before it goes to Cabinet and look at other elements. Because there are questions, frankly, and no disrespect meant to Ben or to Tony or to Malcolm or any officer sitting in this room, but there are questions that haven't been fully answered that could be fully answered at a subsequent meeting. And I just want to set a line in the sand in that respect as well. Because I don't think we're being dishonest, but I do think we are being disingenuous by not also talking about Amherst Road. And let me just give a quick history lesson, if I may, Chairman, to Councillor Coleman. We've had a community health point there for many, many years. Many, many years. So let's not make political points about what the previous administration did or didn't do, because we've always wanted that coalition of public sector within the buildings, within the town centre, and that's something we've always done for 20 years or more. But I do think that we need to be honest to the public, because we're not just talking about 15 million for this project. We will be coming again, or certainly officers will come again with proposals for Amherst Road to make those fit for purpose. And I do think, whilst it's correct to say that it might be phased, I think it is disingenuous to imply that this spend of 15 million will solve everything, because there will still be ongoing revenue costs. There will still be capital spend on this building as we go forward. I do believe we did the roof, for example, some time ago, and that hasn't been raised, for example, this evening. I don't think a full refurbishment is going to future-proof this building for a generation or more. But I do think we need to also talk about Amherst Road in the round, because we need to be honest to the public, not just in Bexhill, but across the whole of Rother, that there needs to be some expenditure on that building as well, and that could be quite extensive capital expenditure to make it fit for purpose. So I do think we need to talk about that as well, in terms of if we are talking about the whole of the town centre. And I think town centre, in terms of this building and how it relates to other buildings in the town centre which are under our ownership. I also think that we need to look quite holistically at the other buildings that are in the ownership of this authority that are in the immediate vicinity. Other buildings across the road in Amherst Road, for example, because I think that the public need to know what they're in for, whether it's this project or any other project that comes forward. And I do think that I need to go back just to the point I made earlier, is are we talking about an extra meeting of scrutiny before Cabinet? That is the fundamental. Then we haven't got to have the long debate that could go to 11 o'clock this evening.
Just to answer Councillor Maynard's question in short, if members are saying they want another meeting of scrutiny, which is, I think you were being subtle in the way you were putting it, then what we will have to do is take it away and have a look at it. I mean, I don't really want to arrange it on the hoof, but I think one of the things that is clear tonight is that we and I know other members wanted to say things, and I accept that, is there are still issues that you want information on or more detail on, whatever. We need to distill some of that down. So what we can do after tonight is take it away, have a look at what the timetable would be if we were to put another meeting, either an extra meeting or take it to the next meeting of scrutiny. But if that's the wish of members, I'm happy to go with that.
Chairman, if it's helpful, I'll move a recommendation that the decision put forward to Scrutiny Committee today is deferred, and that we move to an additional meeting of scrutiny once the consultation responses have been received, and that an analysis of those consultation responses forms part of any subsequent scrutiny debate at a future meeting, I guess, through you, Chairman, in September.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, that's the reason we took the first three items was because it's got to be on a cabinet. They're on the cabinet agenda for next Monday, so that's why I wanted to get those done and out of the way. The next cabinet is not until the 5th of September.
To be clear, I'm talking about a meeting after we've had the consultation responses prior to cabinet.
Yeah. So we've got our next meeting here is the 12th of September. So do you want it? I would urge caution there. Hang on. I would urge caution there, because we've also already got built leisure facilities strategy, first draft, performance report, healthy living task and finish group, first homes 100% affordable housing. Would you prefer a standalone scrutiny meeting to get the information that we've requested, Ben?
Jim, if I may, I mean, I think Councillor Maynard has moved an amendment, and it will be voted on. If that amendment is accepted, can I suggest that we go away, have a discussion with yourself, and come back to you with a proposal that meets the requirement that Councillor Maynard's amendment clearly lays out?
Amendment, I need a second.
I second that, on the understanding that the consultation period includes September, or goes to September. It can't be in August. There's not much point. It's a complete waste of time in August.
Yeah, it's not going to work. It's not going to.
Quickly, yeah.
If I may, Chair, would Councillor Maynard be open to adding into his amendment a request from Scrutiny that as part of that consultation there is some sort of physical demonstration of this project in every single ward in Rother?
Through you, Chairman, I would keep it simple, and I think that it's quite clear that members will have more. This is a huge project. Let's not rush things through. Let's make a pragmatic response so that the public can see that this is properly debated. There will be differences of opinion, but I think that in terms of that consultation, I'd be far happier if it was a 6-week consultation, just as the anti-poverty strategy was, and I'm quite happy to add that as a rider to the amendment that I've proposed.
Chair, I wanted to know whether the consultation would include a review of the design aspects of the project.
I would think the design aspect would be down to the planning committee, wouldn't it? Or would that? Or would I can see where Councillor Courthouse is coming from. The design, if you like, is the planning committee, but if you don't need a CAF, do you need the roof terrace? Do you know what is that sort of where you're more coming from?
Well, no, because planning looks at design aspects that have a legal link to planning issues. I'm talking about the holistic design as per the consultation that took place 2 or 3 weeks ago.
I would think you wouldn't. I would be very concerned to have a committee of 16 people trying to design a building.
Yeah, I think.
Hang on.
If I could just respond on the point that Paul.
Yeah, Ben, come back on the point.
So, in terms of the design has now been based on the original consultation, the original bits that we've done, and the design process that we've now submitted a planning application for that design. That will go out to a full planning public consultation as part of the planning process, so a normal 28 days planning consultation, so people will have the opportunity to make full comment on that design. I think the key thing to remember is that planning is not a decision on is this the best thing for this site. It's does the design that's being proposed by the people who are bringing it forward adequately meet the needs of that space and what's being looked at. So it does look at planning does look at buildings in the whole context. It does look at, because planning policy looks at development in the whole context. I think it's very clear to say that the planning aspect is part of the remit for the planning committee to consider based on the planning application that's been submitted. That being said, if the business case undergoes fundamental change, then the planning application that's currently in no longer adheres to that business plan. So it's part of that. So the planning application will stand, the planning committee will consider that in due course, and it's only if the business case or the fundamentals of the business case change that requires a redesign.
I haven't understood where you have the authority, Ben, to submit a case to planning on the basis of a design which has not been considered by any council committee.
Cabinet, February 2021.
Chairman, can I remind members there has been an amendment to the motion moved. It requires a vote. If members wish to change that amendment and don't, or there's been an amendment, actually it was an amendment, Councillor Maynard, you're right. If they don't like that amendment, vote against it and discuss something else, but you have approximately 11 minutes left.
Repeat the amendment. The amendment would be to defer the decision to a further scrutiny committee to be held in September, and that the consultation period be extended to 6 weeks.
We want to inquire whether the town hall could stand on its own without the new building, because in the report you'll see that the new spaces provided under the refurbishment of the town hall are available for letting. So it may well. So I would like separate costings on that and not worry about the new building. That's what I want.
Sorry, can I move the amendment to this point? Because it seems to me There may be other points members want to make, but we need to actually...
Right, so moved by Councillor Maynard, seconded by Councillor Maidley. All those in favour? And any against? Right, that's carried. Thank you. Right, so we'll be back here sometime in September for what I would assume we'll have a standalone meeting to discuss this, and we got one item left, which is agenda item 9, work programme. Are you happy with that as it is? I would like to say you are. Because it's got to that stage in the night when it doesn't matter anymore, but it does, if you know what I mean. So thanks for that. I declare the meeting closed at 19 minutes past 9, and the recording is finished. Thank you very much for anybody watching.